It's Halloween, and today, spooky movies.
I sound like the Count from Sesame Street.
One movie. Two movies.
What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. Happy Halloween, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful weekend. Today, I'm going to give you guys my 10 definitive horror movies. These are the 10 films that I go back to. I say either that really scared me, it made me think in a way that is horrifying, it builds up intensity in a way that allows it to stand out from every other film in the genre. Now, I am not going to be ranking these movies. Normally, I'd rank them, but it's so hard to place one in front of the other because these are my 10 horror films, and I'll explain to you why when I get to that specific movie. Now, I did just kind of focus on the ones that either scare me or creep me out. There are a few movies that I'm leaving off of this list. I'll give you guys my honorable mentions here in a second, that maybe they're classified as a horror film, and maybe I even like them more than the movies on the list, but something about them puts one of the other genres ahead. And we'll start out with my first honorable mention, and that is The Lighthouse. Listen, The Lighthouse, no doubt, has horrifying elements, but I don't think of The Lighthouse as a pure horror movie as much as I do some of these other films that we're going to talk about. Phenomenal film. One of my favorites of last year. But The Lighthouse is on my honorable mentions. Another one is Train to Busan, which comes extremely close. But when I look at, like a zombie movie, I don't really think of it as a scary movie. And maybe that's just the fact that they don't scare me, but they entertain me. Train to Busan is one of the best movies in the genre. It's a fantastic film, but it's not on this list. Other honorable mentions include movies that are indeed scary films that just didn't crack this top 10. The Babadook, which is an incredible movie. Not a lot of people talked about it until it came to Netflix, then everybody talked about it. Insidious and Sinister. I always pair those two films together for some reason. They're both scary, creepy music. James Wan involved with one of them, and they're just really, really good films. And then It, the one that came so close, almost cracked the top 10 for me. I love it. I think it's a great movie. This did actually kind of creep me out. It didn't scare me, some of the jump scares. It's more of a coming-of-age story. Maybe that's why I left it off the list. But the modern It, I think is really, really great. Another honorable mention, one that I think leans into horror, absolutely, but I think it's maybe even more of a thriller, a crime movie, a bit of a mystery in there. Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins' greatest performance, definitely horrifying moments, but I would classify it into other genres first. Now, let's get into my 10 favorite horror movies, and let's start out with the OG, the one that tops most everyone's list, and that is The Exorcist. You watch The Exorcist, and maybe it's just, it's kind of its time, and some elements don't hold up, sure. But when you talk horror, when you talk, I want to be scared when I watch a scary movie, this movie does that. My mom will never watch this film again. She was scarred for life when she was younger. It's got everything you want in a horror film. It's got a 12-year-old being possessed by a demon, and those scenes are just horrifying. Maybe it's the practical effects. Maybe it's the direction. I mean, you can't go wrong with the look of this movie. And Max von Sydow as Father Merrin, and you just go back and revisit these moments in your head. You get scared when you think about this film. This has to be, for me, one of the scariest movies of all time. Pure horror. It does the jump scare right, and it's the OG for a reason. Let's move on to another film that was before my time, and that is a film that, not everyone is going to put horror at the forefront here, but I certainly do. That's Jaws. That is Steven Spielberg's original blockbuster, the film that started it all. Why is that? Well, A, memorable characters. B, scenes that stand out. C, capturing the fear that pretty much everyone has, and a fear that is legitimate because we're not dealing with demons, we're not dealing with ghosts, we're dealing with something that could be in the water when you go to the beach. That's a shark. That's why I love Jaws so much. It's executed so well. But the real standout here is something that I often look for in a horror movie, and that is the script. I think the script is masterful. And of course, what they did behind the scenes, they couldn't show the shark all that often, but again, adding to that horrifying element, I think that makes the movie work even better because we only see it every now and then of course that great third act. So Jaws is Jaws for a reason, one of my favorite Spielberg films. Let's go more modern. Let's go the scariest theatrical experience of all time for me. Very close to another one, but this one is The Conjuring. I remember watching this with my friends and just being blown away not only from how scared I was in the theater, petrified. I remember going home and just looking around the corner and seeing if something was in my closet. But you also have the common horror tropes being utilized, whether it's a jump scare or some really creepy imagery. But it all comes down to the execution. I don't love jump scares when they're not executed properly. When they're executed properly, I'm a big fan. And that's why I think James Wan mastered the jump scare with this movie. It is somewhat of a studio horror film, but as long as you do it in the right way and you give us this family, you make us care about them, all the stuff that happens with the mother, and then, Patrick Wilson, that husband-wife duo, they come in and fantastic characters. Vera Farmiga, everyone is so good in this movie, and I love it. Every time I go back and watch it, I love it. I think The Conjuring is fantastic. Ridley Scott. I think Sigourney Weaver is one of the coolest heroines of our time, and sure, it becomes more of an action franchise in the second movie, and I'm okay with that. I think Aliens is just as good as Alien, but I got to put Alien on the horror list that moment. I think everyone knows the moment where the alien comes out of his body. I mean, we recognize that, oh, that's Alien, of course, but we look past that and see this film directed effortlessly by Ridley Scott, and it gives you these claustrophobic, a movie that's not on this list, but a movie that I really enjoy, The Descent, those kinds of vibes. And as you watch, you start to think about, well, what if I was in this situation? You apply that to real life, and oh my goodness, Alien is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Love everything about this movie. It's been a bit since I've watched it, and I need to rate it on Letterboxd, but a very different kind of horror, a sci-fi horror film. That's got to be on my list. John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982, Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, and it's this team there in Antarctica, and all of a sudden they encounter the shape-shifting alien. Oh my goodness. You talk about practical effects. You talk about the creature design and just the all-time scenes. And when I say all-time scenes, I mean from Carpenter's use of the score to the build-up of these particular moments and then not knowing who is who, and I think that adds to the fear factor. Now, I told you I wouldn't rank these. The Thing is slowly moving up my list as one of my favorite all-time horror films because it holds up so well. 1982, and it holds up this well. I think everyone involved with this movie is magnificent, but it really is just that slow, intense, horrifying build-up. You asked me to compare The Thing and Alien. I don't know which one I picked, but all I know is The Thing is starting to resonate with me just as much as a movie like Alien. I love this movie. I think it's one of John Carpenter's better films, and it's iconic for a reason. We've got John Carpenter back-to-back. It's Halloween. I've always said Halloween is my favorite. You think of the horror franchises. You've got Freddy and Jason and Scream and all of those iconic characters, and everyone has their own, right? Friday the 13th is super entertaining for me, but the one that I always see myself going back to, and even though I don't love the sequels as much, they're still fun to revisit, is Halloween. Whether it's that iconic score, whether it's the pure, imposing presence of Michael Myers, who returned, I think, in a super fun way a few years back. Cannot wait for the next movie, but Jamie Lee Curtis is so good in this movie. And just the use of camera movement, the use of score, all of this to make us fear this really slow-walking dude in a mask who's just a crazy person, right? But we're scared to death while watching. It's iconic for a reason. It's iconic because it set the standards for what something like this could be. I think Michael Myers is great. Halloween is my favorite of those characters. But we can't put anything past a movie that 3C Films has been dying for me to go back and revisit. That is Scream. I did it, bro. I did it. You've been dying for me. Listen, it has been so long since I've watched this movie, and I've honestly not been talking about it as much as... But the way that this plays on every single horror trope, knowingly flipping that on their head. I mean, they have full conversations about other horror movies, about Halloween, and everyone is great. Neve Campbell is great, Courtney Cox is great, David Arquette is great, and I love the way that this story plays out. It is your typical Halloween horrifying movie, but it flips the script on almost everything. I love it. I think Scream is so great. Now, I do have to go back and revisit the sequels. I don't remember as much about them, but watching this film yesterday got me so excited for the new Scream movie. I can't wait to see what that holds. This one's for you, 3C. It does indeed crack my top 10. All right, we're coming back to modern day. We're going to hit on some films that I just love, maybe some movies that I've seen recently, and one of the ones that I'm always talking about is maybe my favorite horror film is Hereditary. Ari Aster dominates with this movie. I also really enjoyed Midsommar. That would probably be in my honorable mentions. But I think Hereditary is much more of a horrifying film. My favorite test that I often do with a movie like this, one that's a bit more divisive with audience members, is I show friends or friends of friends. And recently, a friend of a friend came and watched Hereditary with us, and she absolutely loved it. But more importantly, it scared her to death. She couldn't sleep that night. And that's kind of my test, right? How does Hereditary scare you? It doesn't scare you with your typical jump scares. It scares you with building that fear through whether it's cinematography, whether it's that dark color correction, whether it's some of these beautiful edits that Aster brings us through the characters, and Toni Collette giving us my favorite performance of that year. Oscar-worthy. Now, are the Oscars going to look at this movie and say, well, it's an Oscar-worthy movie? Of course they're not. But I think they should. I think Hereditary is that good. It is my favorite A24 film, and you know it's a movie that's going to make a list like this. Next up is one that I teetered, should I put it on this list? Is it really that much of a horror film? But then I think of, the situation and how Daniel Kaluuya's character reacts to what he sees and where he is in this movie at the end of the day, essentially running for his life because of the horrifying things that he has seen. The more I think about Get Out, the more I'm like, yeah, I guess it is a horror movie. It's not a movie that we think of when we think of horror films, but I think I need to put it on this list just because of what it did for the genre, how it amplified Jordan Peele's already awesome and well-rounded career, what it did for someone like a Daniel Kaluuya, but everyone involved with this movie I think is great. And it's one of the best horror scripts I think I've ever seen. Again, we talk Scream playing on the tropes of a horror movie. Well, it does that, but it does much more than that. And it's an Oscar-worthy film, in my opinion, but at its core, at its base, is the genre of horror. And I love that, and I love what it did for that genre. Get Out has to be on my list. And the final movie we are talking about is one that really freaked me out. Now, yes, it's got that trope of you have to be really quiet. You can't be crunching on popcorn in a theater because you're going to miss the... Okay. I get that, and I was fearful going into this film, but A Quiet Place did everything I needed it to do. It genuinely scared me. Now, was the creature design the scariest thing I've ever seen? No. Was the CGI the best? Of course not. But for what the movie is and how John Krasinski directed and the fact that everything's so quiet until that scene hits or that moment hits, I mean, just in the opening scene alone, we get that moment with the kid, and I'm like, oh, this movie's taking every chance and risking it all for something like this. I love A Quiet Place. It really is one of those films that made me look at the genre and reevaluate it anymore. I mean, horror movies can be and do anything, and the fact that A Quiet Place reinvented what we love about this genre so well, it has to be in my personal top 10. Again, these are my favorites. Not everyone's going to share the same sentiments towards some of these movies, but what I need from you guys is, if you liked this very special list and you'd like something when it comes Christmas time like this, be sure to smash that thumbs up button. But I also need your comments down below. What is your list of 10? What are some movies that I left out that maybe I haven't seen? Or what are some films that hit you in a horrifying, scary, spooky way? Thank you guys so much for watching this. This was so much fun. These were my 10 favorite horror movies, personal favorite horror movies of all time. Appreciate it again, guys. The next video on this channel will either be my live stream tomorrow or my monthly tier list. I'll see you guys soon.